Welcome back guys, and in this video we are going to understand how do we clone an existing Oracle database using the Oracle Enterprise Manager. If you remember, while we were looking at managing the Oracle instance, we had an option of cloning the database. Yes, we are going to use that option to clone the DevDB database onto another server. So guys, I have like these three servers. The first server is our OEM server. If you remember, this is where our OEM server is up and running. This is the second server, which is our dev server that is acting as the target to the OEM server. The OEM server IP address ends with 171. Dev server IP address ends with 172. And right now I have another server on, this is another server I have in my network. So what I've done is I just connected to this server. This is 173 and it's a QA server. So before we can actually clone the DevDB database, which is running on this server, we can check ps-af grep pmon. So this DevDB database is already a target of OEM server. Before we can clone the DevDB onto the QA server using the Oracle Enterprise Manager, first we need to add this QA server to the Oracle Enterprise Manager as a target, because this server is new. And first of all, even before you can clone the DevDB onto this server, we have to make sure this is also part of the OEM server. That means this server must also act as a target which is already added to the OEM server. If the target is not added, definitely OEM will not identify the QA server and cloning will not happen. So before we can add, our first step is to add the QA server to the Oracle Enterprise Manager, right? So before we start, what you have to do is we have to make sure we are adding the IP addresses of all the servers under the etc host file on all the servers, right? So for example, I'll open the etc host file. So I'm editing the etc host file on the OEM server. So on this server, I have the details of the OEM server, the dev server, and now I'm adding the details of the QA server, the new server that I'm going to add as a target to the OEM server. So 173, that is qa.dbhnss.com QA. So let us save this. All right, and I'm adding the same details under the dev server. So 192, 168, 1.173 qa.dbhnss.com. I think the spelling is correct. I'll save this, and we have this third server. Let's open the etc host file. Okay, so we have only one entry. Now we have to add both the entries for the OEM server and for the dev server. So OEM server entry, why we need? Because we want to add the QA server as a target onto the OEM. And why are we, why do we need to add the dev server entries is because dev server must be able to talk to this server so that cloning goes on smoothly. So that's the reason, like, you have to add it up. So 192, 168, 1.171, that is oem.dbhnss.com, that is OEM server. And then the next one is 192, 168, 1.172, that is the dev.dbhnss.com. This is the dev server, right? All right, so we have added the entries of all the servers under the etc host of all the servers, right? So each server knows about the other server. So our first step is done. Our next step is, like, we need to add this QA server to our Oracle Enterprise Manager as a Linux target. So what is the best way to do it? So we'll go to our support website, and if you remember, we have an article on how to add Linux target, right? Can you see? Add Linux target to OEM via pull method. We are not going to use the pull method, but we are going to use add Linux target to Oracle Enterprise Manager Cloud Control 13C. So we don't have to run through all the steps because already one database and listener is running over here. Let us check. Can you see there is a QADB, a database which is already running on this server? So I mean, we don't need to recreate a database. We just need to add this server for monitoring. So let me just show you guys what do I mean. So I'm on to the Oracle Enterprise Manager. If you go to all targets over here, if you just type QA, can you see this QA server is not added for monitoring? So my goal right now is first add this server for monitoring, and later on we'll perform the cloning. So right now, to add this QA server onto the monitoring, we don't need to install the Oracle 12c release 2 because it is already installed. Make sure you make changes to the etc host file, which we have just not done. Yum install Oracle 12c R2 pre-install, not required, but these packages are important. So install below packages as they are required by OEM to install agent on this target machine. So I'll quickly run these on the QA server. Awesome. Once the packages are installed, our next step is actually to create this agent directory, because this is where the agent software will be installed. So what I'll do is I'll create this with the Oracle user, because any which ways Oracle user has to own this directory. Alright, so this is done, and I think pretty much we don't need to run the response file because already database is running. We need to edit the bash profile, and we need to make sure we are adding this agent home. So guys, these steps you can use on any target if you want to add that target to the Oracle Enterprise Manager for monitoring purpose, where already a database and listener are running. So this is the agent location. I'll add this one. We'll execute the bash profile once again just to have that agent variable ready. And I think pretty much that's it. We don't need to create a database. Listener is, we don't need to create the listener also. Add Linux target to OEM. Now this is important step. So before we can add Linux target, we must add the target details to etc host file on the OEM server, which we have already done. If you remember, our first step was to add these entries to etc host file, right? Can you see the QA server details are added to the OEM server. Now guys, why we are doing it? Because we don't have a DNS server in our local setup, but in real time you will have the DNS servers. And if you have DNS servers, you don't need to edit the etc host file. Automatically the IP address and the host names will be resolved from the DNS server. So this is just an extra step for our local setup. Now to add this QA server as a target onto the OEM, we need to log into the OEM console, go to setup and add targets manually. Click on install agent on host. Now click on add. Give the host as qa.dbhgenesis.com. Platform will be Linux x86 64-bit. Click on next. Over here, installation directory, you know it is, actually you have to give the installation directory only till agent, and delete all this. U01 app Oracle agent, that's the directory. Agent instance directory will be /agent_instance. Name credentials, I will add name credentials for this server. So what are the name credentials? These are the credentials for the Oracle user that owns the Oracle installation. I think the password is correct. And anytime you're giving the name credentials, always use good naming conventions. QA_Oracle_user, right? So that's a good naming convention. And what I'll do is I'll also give the root credentials, because I know the root user ID and password. In real time you would not know it, but that's okay. All right, so this is done. As I say, always give good naming conventions, root_user, and then click on OK. That's done. Delete anything that you see over here. All right, we are ready to deploy the agent. Click on next and click on deploy agent. So this will start adding the QA server for monitoring purpose on our OEM. Awesome guys, we can see that the QA server is added to the OEM, and our goal is to now discover the database and the listener which is running on the QA server. So we'll go to specify the host, and over here we'll select the QA server because we want to discover the database and listener on the QA server. Click on next. So this is discovering all the targets on this QA server. Awesome. On the QADB, I mean, this is the database which is running. So the monitoring user will always be DBSNMP. By default, this user is locked and the password is expired. So what we need to do is we need to actually unlock the user. So SQL plus /assistdba. Let us look at env grep that's QADB. All right, SQL plus /assistdba. So alter user DBSNMP account unlock and identified by Oracle. Awesome. That's, I mean, I'm using Oracle as the password, so I'll give the monitoring password as Oracle. I want to also monitor the listener which is running on this server. You can click on test the connection. Yep. So the connection is successful. Click on next. And now OEM is ready to monitor the QA database and the listener which is running on the QA server. So guys, till now what we have done is, I mean, this part is when, I mean, you'll use this only when the cloning server is not added to your OEM server. But in case if you have already cloning server, I mean the target server where you want to clone, if it is already added onto the Oracle Enterprise Manager, then directly you can start from the cloning steps which we are going to see right now. You can see the QA server is being discovered. So we will wait for some time, and then once all the QA targets are discovered, we will start the cloning process. Awesome guys, so it took 15 minutes for all the targets to be discovered, and now we can see all the targets are up and running. Now see guys, this is the beauty. If your source and the target servers are already listed on Oracle Enterprise Manager, so that means in our case the QADB, right now the QA server and the dev server both are now being monitored by the Oracle Enterprise Manager. So going forward, understand how simple the steps are for cloning. Like just a couple of steps and the cloning will be done, right? So in our case, the problem we had was the QA server was not being monitored by the Oracle Enterprise Manager. So that's why we had to first add this as a target to our Oracle Enterprise Manager, and then only we were able to, I mean, we will be able to perform the cloning. Now guys, before we perform the cloning, the thing is on the QA server, I have limited RAM because I think I have attached the QA server like 4 GB RAM. So what I'll do is first I will bring down the existing database that is running. So I'm using the OEM. From OEM itself, I can bring down the database. So right click on QADB, Oracle database, control, startup and shutdown. So we want to shut down the instance so that when we perform the cloning, the new instance has the available 4 GB RAM, otherwise the cloning will fail. So if you have more RAM on the target server, definitely we don't have to shut down the existing databases which are running, but just in case this is test environment, so I need to accommodate the new instance. So over here, the host credentials, QA_Oracle user. So I'll go with the named credentials. Under the database credentials, we did not save any database credentials. So what I have to do is I have to connect the server, I mean the Oracle database with the sys user, give the password for the sys user, click on test, and the test must be successful. Click on OK. Now OEM will allow you to shut down this database. So I'll go ahead and shut down this database. So what I'm doing is on the QA server, I'm shutting down the QA database, so that we can clone the database from the devdb database to the QA server. All right, we can see the QADB is down. So now we are ready for the cloning. As I said, guys, in your case, let's take in your environment, the target server has enough RAM, so you can proceed with the activity. Right now, we are going to see the actual cloning steps. So our goal is to clone the dev database, which is running on the dev server, onto the QA server, right? So now we have both the servers. Both the servers are being monitored by the Oracle Enterprise Manager. On the QA server, the QA database is down because we don't have enough RAM over there. So if we clone, the cloning will fail. So what we are going to do is, on the dev, like the database instance, just right click on the dev instance, go to Oracle database, go to cloning, and choose the option create full clone. We want to create a full clone of the dev database as it is right now. So it is like active database cloning live. So whatever data we have on the devdb database right now, we want to clone it onto the target server. All right, over here you have two sides. The source database is the devdb. The type is single instance database. The version is 12.201. sysdba database credentials, by default it will pick up the preferred credentials, else you can click over here and give the different credentials if you want to. But as I always say, setting up preferred credentials in Oracle Enterprise Manager is very important. It simplifies your life. Now, date time series, do you want to clone it right now or you want to go to point in time? So point in time is definitely Oracle Enterprise Manager will look for some previous backups and then it will start applying the archive logs onto the target server. But right now we don't have any backups for the devdb, so I'll go for the current live database cloning. This is where you got to put the destination details. So what is the display name? So what I'll do is I will just delete this. I'll put devdb underscore qa.dbagenesis.com and devdb underscore qa is the global database name, and I'll put the devdb as the database SID. So the global database name, I think we can change it like devdb. I'll put it as .qa.dbagenesis.com. So that defines that devdb, which is running on the QA server. That's the global database name, and the database SID is devdb. The type I want to create a single instance database. Of course, you can even copy the single instance database to rack or rack one node, but right now we don't have the ASM setup or the grid setup, so we cannot go for the rack setup. Now on the host, we need to give the Oracle home location. So if you choose this option, by default it will list all the Oracle homes. You have to select the Oracle home which is on the QA server. All right, so you make sure you select the qa.dbagenesis.com. This is Oracle database 12 home, right? Select this one, and the next host, make sure it is the qa.dbagenesis.com, the server where the cloning will be performed. Database host credentials, make sure you have the qa.oracle user because we are connecting to the server as the Oracle user. Click on OK. Now we'll click on next. And guys, one more thing, you got to make sure your source database, that is the dev, the one that you're trying to clone, all right, it is actually running in archive log mode. So over here, I'll just check. I think it has to be in archive log mode, archive log list, because if it is not in archive log mode, definitely the cloning will fail. All right, so give the okay. So the second part is the configuration. So database file location. So on the target server, once the cloning is done, where do you want to put your files? The data files, the temp files, redo log files, and the control files. On the target server, I want to put it under u01/db_files. So if you have different location, you guys put your location. So in my case, this is the location where I want to put all the db files, control file, temp files after the cloning is done, right? And FRA location, in my case, under the QA server. This is the FRA location, so I'm just giving the FRA location under U01. So whatever FRA location you have on the QA server, you got to put that location over here. So guys, you might also choose to do something like this. So you want to, like in your case, if it is like /oracle/ you can give the database SID, that is the devdb, and then you create this location on the QA server. So otherwise, if the location is not created, the cloning will fail. So in my case, I have this location already ready. So db_files. So I'm using these location. The FRA size, I'm going with 8 GB, the default one. The listener configuration, you got to make sure you are seeing the listener which is already running on the QA server. Don't worry, OEM will automatically pick it up because it was already set to monitor. The database credentials, what passwords you want to give for this system dbsnmp. So I'll just give something over here. All right, parallelism, do you want to increase the RMN speed? Like over here it is grayed out, but in your case, if you have more number of CPUs, OEM will allow you to increase the degree of parallelism so that the cloning speed will be faster. These are the initialization parameters, guys. In case you plan to edit any of the initialization parameters, you can do it over here. But right now at this point of time, I choose not to change these parameters for simplicity purpose. So I'll click on next. Over here you have post processing. Do you want to run any custom scripts post processing? Like this is pre-script, right? Pre-script is the script that you want to run before the cloning starts. Postscript is like any script that you want to run after the cloning is done. And is there any SQL script that you want to run inside the target database or the clone database? So once the cloning is done, do you want to run any SQL script inside the clone database, right? We don't have any of these options. I'll just click on next. Schedule, do you want to clone it right now or do you want to schedule it later? Now this is the beauty, guys. Many a times in real time, what happens is on every Saturday midnight, your manager will ask you to perform the cloning from production database to the target database or the test database, right? So you can schedule the cloning by default. You don't need to sit in front of the system. So you can schedule it on Saturday over here. Like I can choose on 16th, I want the cloning should happen at the midnight, right? I can like change the time, whatever time it is, and done, right? So the beauty about this is like exactly on Saturday at midnight time, any which ways we are cloning from the live database. So whatever production data we have on the production database, it will be cloned onto the target database automatically, even though you're not sitting in front of the system. That's the beauty. But right now we don't have time for Saturday, so we'll go for immediately. We want to perform the cloning right now. Click on next. This is your review screen. You have the source devdb. This is the host. It is running on the dev server, Oracle home location and other details. All this is not important. The right side is very important. The destination, the display name is devdb_qa.dbgenesis.com. Global database name is devdb.qa.dbgenesis.com because it is running on the QA server. I'm keeping the SIDs same, right? devdb. Single instance database. The host should be different. Make sure source host and the target host are different. Over here we have these parameters, right guys? In this one, make sure you're creating these two directories, the adump location. So we got to create this on the QA server. So mkdir-p, and we have to also create the cdump location. These two are important. Just create these directories, else your cloning might fail, right? And we got to clone it immediately. Simply click on clone. Awesome. Now OEM is set to perform the cloning. It is actually preparing your target server for the clone. So you can refresh the screen and you can see the clone new database. This is actually running. This is the one that is currently running. And over here you can see these all steps are skipped because we are not using those options, so all these steps are skipped. Clone new database, click on this option. We can see qa.dbgenesis.com, click on this one, and this step is skipped. Create new profile, execute pre-database. Remember the pre-database scripts, we don't have any scripts, so we are skipping this one. Clone the database, this is running, so I'll click on this option. Initialize deployment procedure, this is done. Prepare database clone job, this is also done. Create duplicate database, we can see this is running, so I'll click on this one. And prepare target list, this is skipped. And clone database, this is running, I'll click on this one. And we can see devdb, this is being cloned. I'll click on this one again, clone database. So this is the exact job right now running. If you click on this option, this checkbox on the left hand side, over here you will see what exactly is happening within that particular step. Can you see clone database? This step is right now over here, and you can scroll and see what exactly is going on inside the database. So I believe like once, if we have done everything fine, so we just have to wait for some time for OEM to complete all these steps. Once these steps are completed, our database cloning will be done. Awesome guys, you can see on the left hand side the clone database step is completed, and next it proceeded on to execute the post database scripts, open user accounts. So these all are skipped steps because we didn't configure it. Post data source creation, this is completed. And as I said, if you want to check what happened on this step, click on this option over here, and the OEM will show you on the right hand side specifically about this step. So I think it will open up as a new tab over here. We'll wait for it to open up. Meanwhile, you can read, create new profile, all these are skipped. And the last one is important. What OEM is doing is, now that the cloning is done, the same clone database is now being added to the OEM as a target for monitoring purpose. So that's what you can see, add target clone properties, right? This pop-up. Now over here, populate target properties, it actually means that the target clone database, the database which is cloned onto the QA server, that is now added for monitoring also. And we can see that our entire cloning is completed. You can see the exact time it took is like 22 minutes for cloning, and status you can see as succeeded. Now what we'll do is we'll go to our QA server and we will check if the cloning was successful or not. So ps-ef grep pmon, we see a devdb database is running on the server. Perfect. So we'll export the oracle_sid to devdb SQL plus /assistdba, select name comma open underscore mode from v dollar database. Can you see guys, we performed a database cloning from the dev server. This is where the devdb is already up and running, right, onto the QA server, and this is the database. Perfect. And this was done as the live database cloning, right? I'll exit. Awesome. So guys, what we have seen in this entire activity, what we did is we had a completely new server which was not being monitored by the Oracle Enterprise Manager, that is our QA server. We added the QA server for monitoring onto the Oracle Enterprise Manager, and later on we started the cloning process. The cloning process with Oracle Enterprise Manager is very simple. It is only 6 steps that you need to perform within the OEM. Once you follow those 6 steps, automatically cloning will be done. Once again, I'll walk you through the cloning steps. So let's take, if you want to clone the devdb, right click, go to Oracle Database, cloning, choose the option create full clone. Over here, you define the source and the destination. Next, you define the configuration, initialization parameters, post-processing, schedule, and review. I think 6 steps that allows you to perform the cloning. Simple, straightforward. One thing you need to remember is always make sure both the servers, like the source and the target servers, must be monitored by Oracle Enterprise Manager in order to perform the cloning. Else, let's take you want to clone the DevDB database onto a server which is not being monitored by the Oracle Enterprise Manager, then you have to follow the traditional method. That being said, guys, I would like to give you an assignment. I would like to challenge you. What you can do is try to create a destination server. In your practice, try to create a destination server like with good RAM, probably like around 10 GB RAM. Try to install the grid and also set up the ASM. Later on, come to the screen, perform the cloning of the DevDB database to a RAC database, right? So this is your assignment. When you get free time, try to perform this assignment. Meanwhile, I will see you all in the next video.